हेलो वेलकम टू हिस्ट्री इज मिस्ट्री। अल्लाह के बनाए हर नायाब चीज़ पर सिर्फ अलाउद्दीन का हक है। You remember this dialogue by Ranveer Singh from the movie Padmavat. Today we'll be talking about the market reforms of Alauddin Khalzi and the impact of this reform on various sections of the society. For example, the peasants, the agriculturists, the traders, the people, especially in and around Delhi. What were the positive implications, the criticisms of these regulations, market regulations, from various historians' point of view? So let us start. We can divide our entire discussion into three parts. The first is the motive behind introducing such a sweeping regulation where the price of every commodity, starting from a needle to luxury items, were fixed by the state. Secondly, we'll also talk about the implementation, the mechanism of implementation. Thirdly, the impact that was felt. The sources that we have used, the primary source will be Tariq-e-Firozh Shahi by Ziauddin Barni. Other than this primary source, uh, other sources, I've also used other sources like Khazainul Futuh by Amir Khusro. Then we have also talked about some other sources like Risala of Maulana Shamsuddin Turk, but you need not mention all these sources. You just need to mention Barni's Tariq-e-Firozh Shahi. So let's get started with our discussion. The motive behind the introduction of these regulations. There are two motives. It is a matter of debate right now behind the motives, but broadly historians classify or historians identify two motives behind the introduction of such regulation. The first motive is basically the motive of the idea of Ziauddin Barni from the source Tariq-e-Firozh Shahi. According to Barni, it was a constant threat from the Mongols that necessitated large standing army for which Sultan needed huge fund. So you know that during that period, Mongols became a live threat to the Delhi Sultanate, especially the northwestern part of India, where multiple Mongol incursions could be recorded during that historical period. Now, how to increase the product, how to increase the revenues of the state? The Sultan had very limited options. The first option was to increase the revenue from the agrarian sources, but we know that agrarian revenues or resources cannot be multiplied overnight, right? So, in less budget, it was the challenge to maintain or to raise a huge army. And the option that was available to the Sultan was by curtailing the salaries of the soldiers first. And secondly, if you raise a huge army, you need to provide them with certain basic amenities, and that basic amenities could be maintained out of very low budget or very low resources by fixing the items at very low prices. So our discussion on the first motive is to maintain a huge army or to resist the constant Mongol incursion. A huge standing army was needed, and Sultan had to resort to these stringent market regulations so that a huge army could survive on limited funds. So this is very important. You need to mention this in your answers. And this argument from Barni's Tariq-e-Firozh Shahi is also supported by modern historians like Irfan Habib. Let's come to the second argument or second motives as for modern historians. Professor Khalik Ahmed Nizami. The scheme was rather a humanitarian, uh, a sort of humanitarian assistance to the common people from the Sultan. He gives account of Khairul Majlis and Khazainul Futuh. These are primary sources. You need not mention it. Just can mention. You can just mention that according to modern historians, K.A. Nizami, the scheme was meant for the benefit of the common people. Let's come to the criticisms. Now, we cannot blindly accept either of the two motives. The first motive, that is, the scheme was meant for the benefit of the army, can be criticized on the basis of certain very pertinent arguments. The first one is, if the scheme or the benefit was meant only for the soldiers, then why the Sultan would implement the scheme only in Delhi? You are raising a huge army, and your army is supposed to be stationed at every cardinal point of your territory. Then why would you implement a very important scheme like market regulation scheme, where everything, the price of every commodity would be fixed only in Delhi or the suburbs around Delhi? So this argument is also valid, but this can also be countered by citing the reason that the historians, the primary sources that talk about this reform, also talk about every other reforms vis-a-vis Delhi. So even the reforms introduced by Muhammad bin Tughlaq were also discussed from Delhi-centric point of view, right? So this is one argument, but this can also be countered. The second argument is, why did the Sultan permit common people to seek benefits out of it? If the scheme was introduced for army, for maintaining a huge army, why would the Sultan allow common people to draw benefits out of the scheme? Why would you allow common people to take rice and food grains at very cheap prices if the scheme was exclusively meant for the army? Third is various items like the luxury items. Obviously, luxury items would not be used by the army, neither could they be used by the common people at that point of time. Why would the Sultan include luxury items within his list? And that was also an argument. So another argument is, you can just take a footnote out of it, that had the Sultan been a well-wisher of the soldiers, they would not have celebrated by distributing sweets on Sultan's death. It is said that when the soldiers got the news of Alauddin Khalji's demise, they celebrated by distributing sweets, and Barney writes that it relieved the soldiers from the Sultan and the Sultan from the soldiers. So this is also a very interesting argument. Let's move to the next argument. Now, the criticism for common people, criticism in against criticism, if you criticize this argument that the scheme was introduced for the benefit of common people, it was a humanitarian assistance, then this can also be countered, because the reforms only meant to drain off surplus wealth from common people. The agriculturalists, which constitute the majority of the population, were taxed as high as 50%. So almost half of their produce went to the state treasury. And let's have a look at the implementation and working of the scheme. As far as the implementation is concerned, we get to know that the Sultan fixed the prices of almost all the food grains. For this, a separate list was prepared by the Sultan, and each and every item was assessed and a price was fixed. And any deviation from the fixed price was not entertained. Secondly, high-ranking officials, aided by an entourage of spies, ensured that no tampering was done. Basically, this was the Department of Diwan-e-Risalat, which was the Department of Revenue, which overlooked which oversaw all these developments. The third is the large storage of grains were established in Delhi, and the produce from Khalisa land. Khalisa land means the land of the crown, which is directly under the crown. So the produce from those Khalisa lands in the Doab, where revenue was paid in kind, these food grains were stored in these large or huge granaries or grain stores in Delhi. Next, we come to grain trade. Now, this is also very important. Grain trade was controlled by the government. The control, we can say that in the modern times, this can be the logistic controls by the government. Suppose a company XYZ is has opened a logistics has opened a logistics company, and the government says that you cannot do this or that while taking your goods from one place to the other. So this is a sort of controlled mechanism. Similarly, Alauddin Khalzi ensured that transport workers, basically Banjaras, please mention the term Banjara in this point. Transport workers and their families were forced to find habitation. They were asked to settle down on the banks of Yamuna. And this was done only to guarantee the swift transport of grains to Delhi. Moreover, hoarding of grain was also prohibited to prevent black marketing. And this helped in combating inflation, obviously. Multani merchants were basically cloth merchants, used to receive 20 lakhs of tankas. This was the medieval currency, 20 lakh of tankas as an advance loan to purchase and bring cloth to the market. This worked as a sort of working capital to the Multani merchants and ensured that raw materials and ensured that in the market raw materials and other essential items are available all the time. The Sultan also controlled the prices of slaves. Next is appointed many officials to supervise the market. This is also very important. The grain market was under supervision of Shehnai Mandi. These are the officials, and please take note of these officials. These are very important, and you need to mention these in your answer script. Intelligent officers, Barids, this is the term, and secret spies, Manians, were also appointed. Let's have an assessment of the impact that was felt on by the agriculturalist. So this is the majority of the population. And what happened when the Sultan raised the tax revenue to 50%, the highest permissible limit of taxation in Islam? Sultan raised the revenue demand of the state on landed produce to 50%. That is, peasants had to give away half of their produce. And, uh, and that was not all. From the remaining 50%, the peasants had to enter into an agreement with the Banjaras, where they had to sell to the Banjaras a major portion of the remaining 50%, that too on a reduced price fixed by the state. Thus, the peasants were left with the bare minimum. Only subsistence was, they could just survive with that, with whatever was left with them. Next, let's have a look on the impact on traders and merchants. The state fixed the price on every single item without considering the production cost. For example, Barney writes that taking into consideration the cost of raw materials, the state used to fix the price, the maximum retail price that would sell out, without taking into consideration the labor cost. So this is a sort of double taxation. Secondly, harsh penalty created an atmosphere of fear, so much so that the traders wished death. It's better to die rather than trade under Alauddin Khilji's fearful regulated market atmosphere. It explains their misery and helplessness. And lastly, the impact on state officials, and please also add the inhabitants of Delhi and the suburbs around it. A small limited faction who had fixed income, for example, the government officials or the officials of the army, who had nothing to do with the production process. They would not produce anything, they would not sell anything in the open market. That section of the society could benefit from the scheme. And also a certain portion of the people who were residing in Delhi and the suburbs around it, they also benefited from it. So in general, we can list down certain benefits. So Charag Dalvi, in his Malfuzat Khairul Majlis, writes that during the merciful reign of Alauddin Khalzi, even a fakir could afford to purchase 2 blankets in winter. The scheme, the positives, we can list down the positives. The scheme therefore ensured food security in the sense that there was no wastage, raw material was available throughout the year, and there was no threat from no Mongol threat, which otherwise could have disrupted the supply chain. Secondly, supply of raw materials to the traders was ensured nicely. Also, this is just the corollary of the first point. Thirdly, it prevented occurrence of famine. So despite the occurrence of droughts, numerous times, Varni writes that there was not even a single event of famine during the reign of Alauddin Khilji. It balanced the market forces of demand and supply, and as such, inflation was also under control. And most importantly, it eliminated uh, many middlemen from the process of from the production process. Uh, you can specifically mention the Lali system, would that would otherwise increase the price in the long run. And in the conclusion, we can write that in spite of various limitations, it has to be granted that Alauddin did come up with fairly innovative measures of market regulation system. The system of ensuring the enforcement of maximum prices for a wide range of commodities and the elimination of middlemen was a remarkable piece of governmental intervention. So you need to be very balanced in your arguments, and please don't show your outrage in this sort of answers. And please be very careful about the sources that you mention. Whatever be your argument, if you can justify with the sources, and if you take a balanced approach, I don't think you will any deductions will be there in your marks. Please subscribe to the channel History is Mystery in YouTube. Also, please share the videos on the Telegram channel among your friends. Thank you.